I would argue that Notre Dame's biggest rival on the recruiting front right now has shifted from Michigan to Ohio State. Tons of battles between the Fighting Irish and the Buckeyes. I'm Mike Singer, recruiting insider at blueandgold.com, joined by Joseph Hastings, who covers Ohio State for BuckeyeGrove.com on the Rivals Network. So when you talk about Ohio State, Notre Dame recruiting battles, I think you got to start with one. At least this is a Notre Dame YouTube channel, so we got to start with one that Notre Dame here won recently. Brennan Vernon. Um, how big of a shock was that, Joseph, to Ohio State fans, the media? I mean, did you guys see that one coming at all?
Yeah, Ohio State fans, media, myself included, absolutely shocked by the decision. Vernon had recently visited Ohio State, camped at the school, and when talking about Larry Johnson, he described him as a guru. He said he's a wizard with his craft. And he kind of when people saw him talking because there were video interviews of him, reminded people of Joey Bosa, kind of Nick Bosa, kind of that. Had that feel for a pass rusher, that could potentially go to Ohio State. And obviously, with them landing Jack Sawyer in the 2021 cycle, they were kind of hoping to build some momentum in that 2023 class with another in-state big time pass rusher. And Vernon was one of the top options for them. So when he committed to Notre Dame, it was absolutely a surprise to Buckeye Nation and to even Ohio State themselves. Definitely wasn't one that we saw coming, especially so early in his recruitment. But you spoke with him. He kind of broke it down, and there was a big difference between Ohio State and Notre Dame, specifically Ohio State having such a big campus, big student population. Vernon described himself as a low-key kind of guy, and he seemed to fit Notre Dame's culture just a little bit more than he fit Ohio State's.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing. Like, thing with I've been covering Notre Dame for a couple of years, and you've been covering Ohio State for a couple of years, so you're still relatively new to both programs. Is thing with Notre Dame is that they will just land these kids, Joseph, and it's just like totally unexpected. There's just something kind of about Notre Dame that attracts kids. It's just a different thing. Like Brendan Vernon, it just wired a little bit differently. It just made a ton of sense. He's a mentor kid, a borderline 5-star player for Rivals number 9, a prospect nationally in that junior class, and yeah, just wired a little bit differently. Coaching staff at Notre Dame did a really good job landing him. So let's talk about a few other battles. When you look at Notre Dame recruiting, let's just say in the 2022 class, you have Dallin Hayden. I would say was probably one of the bigger ones that Notre Dame and Ohio State were going head to head, and that is already concluded. And then looking some at the Notre Dame ones, like Joey Tanona, offensive lineman, 2022 class. Steve Angeli, quarterback, did, but of course, some of those the Buckeyes weren't super involved in. Irish would have loved to have Terrence Brooks and Jair Brown, a couple of defensive back commits for Buckeyes. Notre Dame would have loved to have those guys in their class. Speaking about defensive backs, though, I think Xavier Nwankpa is probably the biggest target left, arguably on Notre Dame's board right now. What's your read on where Nwankpa is at with Ohio State? Because I think a lot of folks feel like it's Notre Dame or Ohio State.
Yeah, so this one has been, I believe, if you scroll down just a little bit on his profile, I submitted a future cast for him back in November. And Ohio State has been feeling really good about Nwankpa. And the really interesting thing about their pursuit of him is that some people will look at the commitment of Kai Stokes. Ohio State landed Florida-based safety Kai Stokes back in May, and then they're also pursuing Zion Branch out of Las Vegas, Nevada as well. And they may say, okay, that could affect their pursuit of Nwankpa. From what I've been told, that's not going to be the case. And Nwankpa is being pursued by the staff as at the bullet position, which is the outside linebacker safety hybrid role, which was originally occupied or going to be occupied by Deshaun McCullough. So there was kind of a little bit of a switch there. So they're going to be able to fit Zion and Xavier potentially in this class, and they've really prioritized both of them. That's why guys like Jake Pope, who we could have also talked about here between Ohio State and Notre Dame. He wasn't as high of a priority for them as, the ultimate goal for them is to land Zion and Xavier. So, the read that I'm getting on is that they're going to be able to fit both Zion and him in this class. They really kind of shifted, in terms of the position fit, their pursuit of him. So, I think it's going to come down to the wire. I was told a couple of months ago that, he wants to wait it out until until one of his bowl games. I believe he's in the All-American Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. So he wants to wait it all the way out until January, and I think it's going to be a really, really close battle. Both programs are excellent schools. They're top contenders, college football playoff contenders on a yearly basis, and honestly, and Nwankpa can't go wrong. I've heard from the commits that he feels really in tune with his class, that he feels really close to them. But I imagine that's, Notre Dame's commits may feel the same way as well. So I think it's a really close battle.
Yeah, you mentioned McCullough flipped from Ohio State to Indiana. So that was interesting because, when you look at Ohio State's defensive back class, they've got 5 already, and potentially a young man out in Gorman Branch would be 6. So from my standpoint, it's like, does Nwankpa want to be the 7th defensive back commit? But you're saying he's more of a linebacker type. How does he feel about that? Does he like that from your conversations with Xavier?
Yes, I spoke with him last month after the visit. He seemed to be very receptive of potentially playing that position at the next level. And honestly, if you flip on Nwankpa's tape, I had done a film review of him earlier this year, and I'd kind of seen a little bit of some bullet in him. But obviously, McCullough was committed at the time, and he was going to be the primary guy at the position. But he's a very hard-hitting power type of player, but he's also a ball hawk as well. He can read the secondary well and has really good vision. But the way that they've been selling it, I've heard the 2 pitches for Nwankpa and Branch has been, Nwankpa, we want you to be that bullet guy. We want you to fill that position. It's a position of need for us. And then with Zion, we want you to be the quarterback of the defense. We want you to to play out in that, deep man safety fronts, those coverages that they have. So, very 2 different positions. They're not similar at all. So that's the way they're pitching it to both of them.
Yeah, that'll certainly be interesting coming down the stretch here. Of course, Ohio State right now has the number 1 class in the country per rivals. Notre Dame has the number 2 class. Now, looking at class rankings, which we can touch on in a second, Notre Dame is actually, as we record this, Penn State, I am incorrect here, Penn State jumped Notre Dame after landing denied Dennis Sutton, 5-star defensive end. So there's the class rankings. Ohio State with 17 commitments, but you see these points. Look how far they are ahead of Penn State, who has 4 more commitments. It's really an impressive class for Ohio State. And another player that both schools are in the mix for is Emile Wagner from Huber Heights Wayne High School. Of course, that's where Notre Dame defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman, cornerbacks coach Mike Mickens went to high school. Of course, Freeman played at Ohio State. There's just so many layers to this. Of course, Wagner being recruited as an offensive tackle. Freeman's also involved in this recruitment as well because of those connections. Futurecast picks in right now are for Ohio State. Joseph Hastings, you put yours in back in March. What's your read on this one right now? What's kind of the vibe between Ohio State and Emile Wagner right now? Where do you kind of think things stand?
So, Emile isn't as high on the board as a couple of other prospects that they're really pursuing. Most notably Cam Dewberry, out of Texas, out of the Houston area. That's the number 1 tackle target for them. And then they're also pursuing Ernest Green, who would be a guard at the next level. But those are the 2 primary focuses along the offensive line. To join potentially a class that would have George Fitzpatrick, who committed earlier this month, 4-star offensive lineman out of Colorado, and then Tegra Tushabola, in-state offensive lineman for the Buckeyes. So Emile isn't as high on the board as he, as some of those other targets, but Ohio State still, they're still kind of keeping tabs on him. He really likes the program. I caught up with him about a week ago. He says that they'll never be out of his recruitment just because he grew up watching them. He grew up a fan of the Buckeyes. But honestly, it kind of waited a little bit too long in this recruitment. Didn't prioritize him as much. It's hard to kind of keep up, keep pace with those relationships that he's built with other schools. They dipped into his process back in March. We were kind of hearing that a commitment could potentially be around the corner. Then he dropped the top 6, which kind of showed that he was going to wait it out. He said that he wanted to take his officials. He took them. but I'm really feeling like it's going to kind of be Notre Dame. Unless something drastically changes and Ohio State decides to really ramp up their pursuit of him, I think Notre Dame has prioritized him more, and they'll ultimately land a commitment from him.
And look at these official visits. Ohio State started June, and then he went to Kentucky, Notre Dame, and then wrapped things up at Maryland and Penn State. I believe his brother played some kind of sport at Kentucky. Yeah,
Yes.
football team. And I believe he was at Iowa before that. So I think Kentucky, maybe Notre Dame. Yeah, this is interesting stuff here. This is why we bring you on, to get the other side of this. So Ohio State. Maybe not a lock for Emile Wagner like a lot of people think. Last 2022 recruit I wanted to talk about with you, Joseph, was Hiro Kanu. He's actually expected to be at Notre Dame next week on July 28th. Go to these FutureCast picks. A couple of your colleagues project him to land with the Buckeyes. But, you talked about Nwankpa earlier as someone who's wanting to take his recruitment the distance. That certainly is the case for Hiro Kanu as well.
Yeah, Kanu wants to take it all the way out to his All-Star game as well in January. He says he's not going to announce a commitment until then. I spoke with him about a couple of weeks ago. First off, really great kid. Just a solid kid. Just awesome to talk to. Really good with the media. Always has a smile on his face. And he's just got unlimited potential. He's, I believe, 16 years old, won't turn 17 until September, so a fairly young kid.
Wow.
Still new to the game. And I haven't submitted my future cast for Ohio State just yet because, I kind of want to wait to see where his recruitment takes him. As you just saw, Notre Dame dipped into the mix after he released his top 9. So anything can change in the recruiting process for someone who really just started landing offers back in March. But here's the things going in favor of Ohio State. First off, Larry Johnson. I mean, it's for anyone who follows Ohio State recruiting or is even familiar with assistant coaches in college football. Larry Johnson is one of the best. Even though he's more known for the guys like the Bosa brothers and Chase Young. He's also developed interior defensive lineman with Haskell Garrett potentially being a first-round pick in next year's draft. So that's something that defensive linemen at any position are going to look at. So Kanu really appreciated his time with Larry Johnson last month. And actually, he was supposed to camp on June 8th and leave the following day. He ended up staying an extra day. He really liked what he saw from Ohio State. He says that this is kind of something that we'll have to pay attention to. Climate, the weather, all of that. He's coming from Germany. He wants to kind of go somewhere that feels a little bit more familiar to him. He cited that after his first visit as something that was really standing out to him about Ohio State, is that it was kind of similar to where he's originally from in his native Germany. So I haven't submitted a future cast just yet because he's still giving a lot of schools a close look. I don't even think he has his full official visit schedule laid out just yet, but Ohio State definitely is top 2 in my opinion and could potentially be as high as the leader.
Yeah, I mean, when he's going to take 5 visits in the fall, I mean, a pick at this point is just a guess, really, especially if he's stretching all the way to January, like you said. I want to finish talking with about some 2023 guys. I mean, there's just so many that we could go through. But I identified 3 as maybe the biggest to mention right now. Dante Moore. A lot of people think it's a Michigan-Notre Dame battle. I know he really likes Ohio State. I'm curious your take there with Dante Moore.
Yeah, so he camped at Ohio State last month. Definitely likes Coach Corey Dennis. I've been keeping in contact with him even prior to getting an offer last month. So, the Buckeyes just offered, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, the week of June 21st. So it's still relatively early on in his recruitment. Something we're going to have to pay attention to for any quarterback, though, is look who the Buckeyes have in 2022. Quinn Ewers, one of the best quarterbacks, in terms of rankings-wise, and honestly, just from the eyeball test that we've seen coming out of high school in recent years. I haven't been able to catch up with Dante yet, but that's something that you'll have to pay attention to. We don't know. That's kind of been the narrative about Ohio State recruiting in 2023 is would they even land a quarterback or just wait till 2024?
Interesting. Dante Moore visited Notre Dame the last day of June. The recruits could take visits, and he's going back to Notre Dame for a cookout next week. So Irish fans, you'll definitely want to keep an eye on Dante Moore. A couple other guys. from Findlay, Ohio's Luke Montgomery, listed as a strong side defensive end per Rivals. That's where Notre Dame likes him. They hosted him for a visit in June. They really wanted to get him back on campus next week, but with his practice schedule, he wasn't able to make it work. I would assume he's going to Ohio State next week, and I would guess they're looking at him as an offensive lineman too. And I know when Ohio State had that prospect camp, I believe Montgomery and Brennan Vernon were going head to head.
Yes, there were. Yes, there were. So Luke visited twice last month, the first day of the month, June 1st, and then also June 22nd, the camp that you mentioned there. And after that June 1st camp, I actually submitted a future cast in favor of Ohio State. From what I was hearing is that Luke could commit potentially as early as the beginning of his junior campaign or the end of it. And then when I spoke with Luke himself, he told me that he's gonna take his visits, take a couple of visits after this Ohio State one, and then potentially make a decision. So if he does make an early one, I'm expecting it for it to be the Buckeyes. One thing that's interesting, though, that you mentioned with Notre Dame, especially with the position that they're recruiting him at, is that he says that he prefers to be along the defensive line. Like that's actually the spot along the trenches that he would prefer. I don't think that's really going to be the determining factor in his recruitment, but it is something to pay attention to, especially with Notre Dame dipping into Ohio, landing Brennan Vernon. It would not shock me if they go in and take Montgomery as well, but I do have my feature cast in for Ohio State, and I'm still hearing that they feel good about their chances with him.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think that Luke Montgomery's looking good for the Buckeyes. Notre Dame won't give up on that one. When you talk about Notre Dame, Ohio State recruiting battles in the 2021 class, Lorenzo Styles Jr., that was, in my opinion, an upset victory for the Irish, with, of course, his father, Lorenzo Styles Sr., being a linebacker for the Buckeyes. And my favorite story, I'll tell this all the time about Styles, is I was at, this was before Lorenzo even committed to Notre Dame, so it would have been August of 2019. They were playing a high school game. Pick Central was down in Georgia, an hour from my house. So I went to go see him, and I'm standing on the sideline next to this gigantic kid who's on crutches, Joseph, and I'm like, you look just like Lorenzo, but bigger. I'm like, what's your? And he said he was a freshman. He was injured as a freshman, but he was massive then, and he had no offers at that point. First game of his sophomore season, just balled out. I'm sure you remember seeing that one on ESPNU late last August. Picks up Ohio State and Notre Dame and a bunch of other schools. Now he's the number 26 overall player in the country. Long way to ask you, Notre Dame, Ohio State. I'm kind of even like, he might just say, screw that, I'm going to Clemson. Like, I don't want to follow either footsteps. Like, what's your read?
Yeah, so Sonny Styles is definitely going to be an interesting prospect following his recruitment. He took a lot of visits last month, made his way out to Ohio State a couple of times, actually, attended a couple of camps, and he's just so versatile. When he went to Ohio State's camp, he actually worked at all three levels of the defense. He worked in the secondary with Kerry Combs and Matt Barnes. He worked at linebacker with Al Washington, and he worked along the defensive line with Larry Johnson. I mean, this is just – he's a can't miss prospect in my opinion. I don't like saying that too much, but he's so versatile. He can do so much. But the read that I'm getting is that it's going to be Ohio State, Notre Dame. That's the impression that I've gotten based off of what I've heard. Ohio State obviously has to like their chances with him, especially the fact that his father played there. The fact that they're targeting him for that bullet position, which is a position that they're really trying to sell the prospects. Like, hey, you can do kind of a little bit of both with linebacker and safety. But you can't rule out Notre Dame as well. You talk about Brennan Vernon. I don't think Sonny is is the same kind of character as he is, but he is a little bit more reserved. He's not the flashy kind of player that you expect of a number 26 overall prospect in the country. So would it shock me if he goes to Notre Dame and joins up with his brother? Absolutely not. So, I definitely think as of right now it's Ohio State and Notre Dame, but this could go either way in my opinion.
If you had to put in a pick, would it be Ohio State? Right? If you had to put in a pick right now?
Putting me on the spot, Mike Singer. I would probably put in Ohio State just for right now.
I would, and if it was up to me, I'd put in Notre Dame. But I guess that's just, hey,
Homerism bleeds in somewhere. So, the last question for you, and this isn't something that I prepared to ask you. Um, so this is also putting on the spot, but when you interact with Ohio State fans on your Buckeye Grove message board, and what's your perception of Notre Dame? Like, how does the Ohio State community perceive Notre Dame, whether it comes to recruiting on the field? Just curious of your take.
I mean, they've got respect for Notre Dame. They're based on my interactions with the fans, they don't really say anything negative about them, about their recruiting. There seems to be a high level of respect for what they're able to accomplish and what they sell to recruits. I mean, when Brennan committed to Notre Dame, it wasn't obviously Buckeye fans were upset about what happened, but it was kind of understood, that it's an opportunity to go to a school that does compete, every single year, that isn't a school that is like bordering top 25 or anything. I mean, this is a top 10 program on a yearly basis. It's a school with good academics. It's very similar to Ohio State, except obviously lower student population, a little bit more quiet. But there's a lot of respect for them. Now, if we talk about Michigan, that's a different story. There's obviously some harsher words there, but for Notre Dame, for the most part, based on my interactions with them, a lot of respect. What about you? What's the perception with Ohio State fans?
Yeah, I don't think Notre Dame fans like Ohio State very much at all. Michigan is Notre Dame's biggest hatred. So, the meme where you got the guys locking arms over something that they hate, that would be Ohio State and Notre Dame fans linking up over hating Michigan. So there you go. Joseph Hastings, BuckeyeGrove.com. Appreciate you joining us, man.
Mike, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it, man.